The night was heavy with rain, a relentless downpour that drowned the streets of Chicago in cold, shimmering reflections of the neon signs that flickered outside rundown apartment buildings. Inside one of these buildings, in a dimly lit, cluttered living room, 12-year-old Malik Johnson pressed his small frame against the wall, his hands trembling as he clutched a battered phone. His heartbeat was a drum pounding against his ribcage, a rhythm of fear and urgency. His fingers hovered over the screen for just a second before he finally pressed the numbers. 911. The ringing seemed to last forever. 911. What's your emergency? A deep, calm voice answered, but Malik couldn't find his words immediately. He bit his lip hard, trying to steady himself, but his breath hitched as the sound of shattering glass erupted from the next room, followed by his mother's scream. Please, he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Please help us. The operator's voice remained steady. I need you to stay calm. Can you tell me what's happening? Malik squeezed his eyes shut. It's my dad. He's drunk again. He's hitting my mom. My little sister is here too. Please, he's gonna hurt her. The operator's voice sharpened. Are you safe? Can you leave the house? No, Malik breathed, shaking his head even though no one could see him. If I go out there, he'll hurt me too. The operator spoke with a sense of urgency now. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Malik, you're doing great. Another crash. Louder this time. Aisha, his 6-year-old sister, whimpered under the couch where he had hidden her. She clutched a stuffed bear, her big brown eyes brimming with fear. Malik reached down and squeezed her tiny hand. Just hold on, he whispered. The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the storm. But inside, the nightmare wasn't over yet. Officer Daniel Harper had seen his share of calls like this. Domestic violence cases in the dead of night. Children crying on the other end of the line. But something about the boy's voice had shaken him. There was something too steady, too practiced, as if Malik had done this before. Daniel's patrol car screeched to a halt in front of the apartment building. He and his partner, Officer Lewis, barely exchanged a glance before sprinting toward the entrance, the rain soaking through their uniforms as they went. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, the apartment was in chaos. A broken lamp lay shattered across the floor. The couch overturned. Lisa Johnson, a woman in her early 30s, was slumped against the wall, her lips split and bruises forming on her arms. Standing above her was Frank Johnson. His bloodshot eyes were wild with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. The air reeked of whiskey and anger. Police. Daniel's voice was firm as he drew his weapon. Step away from her now. Frank turned sluggishly, a deep scowl on his face. This ain't your business, he slurred, his body swaying. Lisa whimpered, trying to crawl away, but Frank grabbed her arm roughly. I said step back, Daniel shouted, his grip tightening on his gun. Frank let out a bitter laugh, but he released Lisa, stumbling backward. The officers moved in swiftly, pinning him to the ground as he thrashed and cursed. Malik appeared in the doorway then, his small body rigid with tension. Daniel turned to him. Malik? His voice softened. Are you okay? Malik nodded stiffly, but his hands were still shaking. Aisha peered out from behind him, clutching Malik's sleeve. Lisa pulled herself up, gathering Aisha into her arms. Tears streaked her bruised face, but she held her children tightly. As Frank was dragged out of the apartment, he spat at the floor, his voice thick with hatred. This ain't over, boy. Malik met his father's gaze, but he didn't flinch. The apartment was eerily silent after the police took Frank away. The broken furniture, the shattered glass, it all seemed frozen in time. Remnants of a battle fought too many times before. Lisa sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands, while Aisha curled up against her side, her thumb in her mouth. Malik stood a few feet away, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. Daniel watched the boy carefully. He had seen that look before, the quiet strength of a child who had learned too early how to protect the ones he loved. "Malik," he said softly, kneeling to the boy's level, "you did the right thing tonight." Malik's dark eyes flickered toward him. "It doesn't matter," he said quietly. "He always comes back." The weight in his voice made Daniel's stomach twist. Lewis stepped forward. "We can get your mom some help. A safe place to stay." Lisa shook her head, lifting her face. "They always say that, but it never lasts. He finds us. He always does." Daniel clenched his jaw. He had seen too many families trapped in this cycle. Women who didn't believe they had a way out. Children who carried the burden of fear long before they should have. "You don't have to go back to this," he said, looking at Lisa, then at Malik. "We can help you, but you have to want it." Malik's fingers curled into fists. He wanted to believe it, but deep down, he wasn't sure hope was something he was allowed to have anymore. Malik barely slept that night. Even with Frank gone, his body stayed tense, ears tuned to every sound outside the apartment. His mother had finally collapsed onto the couch in exhaustion, and Aisha was curled up beside her, breathing softly. Malik sat on the floor near the window, his knees drawn to his chest. The rain had stopped, leaving the city coated in a dull, wet glow. He stared out at the streetlights, their flickering beams casting long shadows against the walls. A knock at the door startled him. He stood, heart hammering, but when he peeked through the peephole, he saw Officer Daniel Harper standing there. Malik hesitated before opening the door. Daniel held up a bag of food. "Thought you might be hungry." Malik didn't answer, but his stomach betrayed him with a quiet growl. Daniel chuckled softly and handed him the bag. Malik took it cautiously, stepping back. "Why are you here?" Daniel sighed. "Because I know what it's like to be in your shoes." Malik frowned. "No, you don't." "You're right," Daniel admitted. "I don't know your life. But I know that kids like you, kids who are brave enough to stand up even when they're scared, don't deserve to carry this alone." Malik swallowed the lump in his throat. He had spent years trying to be strong for Aisha, for his mom, but for the first time in a long time, he let himself believe, just for a moment, that maybe he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a way out of the darkness. The morning light crept through the blinds, painting long golden stripes across the worn-out carpet. The apartment, though still cluttered with the remnants of last night's chaos, was unnervingly quiet. The silence felt unnatural, too heavy, too expectant, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Malik lay awake on the small mattress he shared with Aisha, staring at the ceiling. His body ached from tension, but it wasn't the physical pain that weighed on him. It was the uncertainty. Beside him, Aisha stirred. Her tiny fingers clutched the frayed ear of her stuffed bear, and her face was scrunched in distress even in sleep. Malik gently brushed a few curls from her forehead, a quiet gesture of comfort, though he knew it wasn't enough to keep her nightmares away. He slid out of bed carefully, trying not to wake her. Moving quietly through the apartment, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. Lisa's face was swollen from bruises, her lips still cracked from the night before. She hadn't even bothered to put ice on it. She looked up as Malik approached, her tired eyes softening. "Did you sleep?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Malik shook his head. Lisa reached out, brushing a gentle hand over his cheek. "I'm sorry, baby." It wasn't the first time she had apologized, and Malik knew it wouldn't be the last. Aisha's voice broke the quiet. "Is Daddy coming back?" Malik's stomach twisted. He turned to see her standing in the hallway, her small frame swallowed by the oversized t-shirt she wore as pajamas. Her wide brown eyes searched his face for an answer, one that wouldn't terrify her. Lisa inhaled sharply. "No, baby, he's gone for now." Aisha didn't seem convinced. She shuffled toward Malik and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his side. Malik held her close, running a hand over her back the way their mother used to when they were little. He wanted to believe that his father was really gone, But he had learned a long time ago that some monsters always found their way back. The memories came to Malik in flashes, bits and pieces of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. There was a time when Frank Johnson wasn't a monster. He remembered the way his father used to lift him onto his shoulders, laughing as they ran through the park, how he would spin Aisha around in the air until she squealed with delight, how his mother would sit on the porch, watching them with love in her eyes. There were Sunday afternoons filled with music, Frank's deep voice singing along to old records as he danced with Lisa in the kitchen. There were bedtime stories, whispered promises of a bright future, and warm arms that held them when the world felt too big. But then, things changed. Frank lost his job at the factory. The bills piled up. The arguments started, quiet at first, then louder, then violent. Malik remembered the first time he saw his father hit his mother. He had been 8 years old. Peeking through the crack in the bedroom door, the sound of the slap had echoed in his ears long after it happened. He had waited for it to be a mistake, for his father to apologize, to cry, to promise never to do it again. But the apologies turned into excuses. The excuses turned into nothing at all. And slowly, the man they had loved disappeared. Now, when Malik tried to picture his father, all he saw was a shadow, something dark and looming, something that could no longer be trusted. But Aisha still remembered the good parts. And that was the hardest thing of all. Daniel Harper sat in his patrol car outside the Johnsons' apartment, fingers tapping against the steering wheel. He knew this wasn't part of the job. He should have filed the report and moved on, just like with every other domestic call. But something about Malik wouldn't let him walk away. The kid had been too quiet, too composed, like he had carried the weight of the world for so long that he no longer knew how to set it down. Daniel had seen that look before. He had worn that same expression as a child, sitting at his own kitchen table, listening to his mother cry while his father's rage filled the house like a storm waiting to break. That was why he couldn't just leave. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and made his way to the door. When it opened, Lisa looked startled to see him. "Officer Harper," she greeted cautiously, glancing over her shoulder at Malik, who was watching from the kitchen. "I wanted to check in," Daniel said, keeping his voice even. "See how you all were doing." Lisa hesitated before stepping aside, allowing him inside. Aisha was coloring at the small coffee table, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Hi, policeman," she chirped. Daniel smiled. "Hey there, kiddo." His gaze flickered to Malik, who was standing stiffly by the counter. "How are you holding up?" Malik shrugged. "We're fine." Daniel didn't push. Instead, he turned to Lisa. "I know you said he always finds you, but it doesn't have to be like that. There are shelters, safe houses, places that can help you start over." Lisa exhaled, her shoulders slumping. "I've heard that before." Daniel studied her face. She wanted to believe it, but fear had its claws too deep in her. "If he comes back," Daniel said carefully, "what happens next?" Lisa didn't answer. Malik did. "I won't let him hurt us again." There was something final in the way he said it. Daniel felt the weight of those words, the unspoken promise behind them. He couldn't let Malik carry that burden alone. 2 weeks later, Malik found himself in a place he had never imagined being, inside a courtroom, standing beside his mother as a judge read out charges against his father. Frank Johnson sat on the other side of the room, his face pale and stubbled. He wasn't drunk now, he looked almost small. But Malik didn't trust that image. He knew better. The judge's voice was stern, listing the evidence of domestic abuse, the police reports, the witness testimonies. Then, the decision came. "Frank Johnson, you are hereby ordered to remain in custody until further sentencing. A restraining order will be placed against you. You are to have no contact with Lisa Johnson or her children unless permitted by the court." Malik exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. His father's gaze found his. For the first time in years, Malik didn't look away. Frank opened his mouth as if to say something, but the bailiff moved to escort him out. Malik turned away first. Lisa gripped his hand. "It's over, baby," she whispered. But Malik wasn't sure he believed that. Not yet, because monsters never disappeared that easily. Malik didn't expect peace to come easily, but he had hoped that sleep might at least grant him some relief. It didn't. Every night since the courtroom, his dreams had been haunted by shadows too dark to escape. The dreams always started the same way. The sound of heavy boots thudding against the floor. The smell of whiskey thick in the air. Then came the shouting. His mother crying. Aisha whimpering behind him. His own voice screaming for it to stop. And then, the worst part, the silence. That unbearable, suffocating silence that always came after his father was finished. When Lisa lay crumpled on the floor. When Aisha curled up into a tiny ball. And when Malik was left standing there, helpless, he would wake up gasping, his body drenched in sweat. Sometimes he screamed before he could stop himself. Other times, he pressed a pillow over his face, swallowing the sobs before they could wake his mother or sister. One night, after a particularly violent nightmare, Malik slipped out of bed and walked to the tiny kitchen, gripping a glass of water with shaking hands. The clock on the wall read 3:47 a.m., but sleep felt impossible. A soft noise made him turn. Lisa stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thin sweater, her eyes tired but full of concern. "Another bad dream?" she asked. Malik didn't answer at first. He simply nodded, staring down at the table. Lisa crossed the room and sat beside him, pulling him close. He let himself lean against her. Just for a moment, the way he had when he was younger, before everything became so broken. "It's okay to be scared," she whispered. Malik clenched his jaw. "I don't want to be scared anymore." Lisa exhaled slowly, brushing his hair back. "Neither do I." They sat in the quiet together. And for once, Malik didn't feel so alone. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into something that almost felt normal. The bruises on Lisa's skin faded. The house, once filled with shattered glass and broken furniture, was slowly put back together. Malik went back to school. Aisha played with her dolls again. Lisa found a new job as a receptionist at a local clinic. But no matter how much they tried to move forward, Frank's presence still lingered like a ghost. One afternoon, while Lisa was at work and Aisha was napping, Malik heard a knock at the door. His stomach twisted as he peeked through the peephole. A man stood there, a uniformed officer. But it wasn't Daniel. Malik hesitated before unlocking the door. The officer gave him a nod, holding out an envelope. "This is for your mother," he said. Malik took it, staring at the handwriting on the front. It was rough and jagged, but he recognized it immediately. His father's. The officer left, and Malik stood frozen, staring at the envelope as if it might burn him. His hands trembled as he opened it. "Malik, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you'll rip it up. Maybe you'll throw it away. I wouldn't blame you. I deserve everything that's happening to me. I deserve worse. But I need you to know one thing. I'm trying. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I needed to say it. I needed to tell you that I want to be better. I don't know if I'll ever see you again. But if I do, I hope you'll see a different man. Take care of your mother and sister. You're stronger than I ever was. Dad." Malik read the letter 3 times before he finally folded it up. His chest felt too tight, his emotions too tangled to unravel. He wanted to hate his father. He wanted to tear the letter apart, to throw it into the trash. But he didn't. Instead, he tucked it into his desk drawer and locked it away, just like the memories that refused to leave him. Lisa found the letter that evening. Malik had left it on the kitchen table, unsure of what to do with it. He waited for her reaction, watching as she read each word carefully, her fingers gripping the paper so tightly it wrinkled under her touch. When she finished, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she exhaled a shaky breath and placed the letter down. Malik studied her face. "Do you believe him?" Lisa looked up, her eyes filled with exhaustion. I don't know. Malik frowned. What if he really is trying to change? Lisa's lips pressed together. Then I hope, for his sake, that he does. But I can't take that risk again. And neither can you. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I spent too many years believing he would change. Malik. And every time I forgave him, he hurt us worse. Malik swallowed. He knew she was right. But a small part of him still wanted to believe in the father who used to sing him to sleep. The father who once held Aisha in his arms and whispered that she was his little princess. Lisa cupped his cheek. I need you to promise me something. What? No matter what happens, no matter how much he says he's changed, you do not let him back into your heart unless you know, with every piece of you, that he deserves it. Malik hesitated, then nodded. I promise. Lisa smiled sadly. Good. She reached for the letter and, without another word, folded it carefully and placed it inside a small box in the cabinet. Then she closed the door. And just like that, they moved on. The months that followed were strange. Life felt different, not perfect, not even peaceful, but something close to stable. And Daniel Harper was still there. He wasn't just a police officer who had responded to a call. He had become something more. He checked in on them every few weeks, sometimes dropping off groceries when Lisa was too exhausted from work to shop. Other times, he picked Malik up from school, taking him out for a burger and sitting with him like he had all the time in the world. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel took Malik to a basketball court near his precinct. It was an old, cracked court, but the nets were still standing, and the pavement still echoed with the familiar rhythm of bouncing balls and quick footsteps. Daniel passed the ball to Malik. You play? Malik shrugged. A little. Good, Daniel said, because I don't like losing. Malik smirked despite himself. We'll see about that. They played for nearly an hour. Daniel proving to be surprisingly quick for someone so much older. He didn't go easy on Malik. But he didn't need to. Malik was faster, stronger, and for the first time in a long time, he felt normal. After the game, they sat on the sidelines, sweat dripping from their foreheads. Daniel took a deep breath. You know, when I was your age, I didn't have anyone looking out for me. Malik looked over. What do you mean? Daniel smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. My dad was like yours. Mean. Angry, no matter what I did. It was never enough. Malik's chest tightened. But someone helped me, Daniel continued. A teacher. Actually, he told me I wasn't my father. That I got to choose who I was gonna be. He met Malik's gaze. And so do you. Malik nodded slowly. I know. Daniel clapped a hand on his shoulder. Good, because you're gonna be someone amazing. Kid, I can feel it. Malik smiled. For the first time, he thought maybe, just maybe, he could believe it too. Malik had never been the kind of kid who dreamed about the future. Survival didn't leave much room for dreaming. His world had always been about getting through the day, about making sure his mom wasn't hurt, about keeping Aisha safe. But now, for the first time in his life, he started thinking about what could be. It started with a class assignment. Mr. Reynolds, his English teacher, stood at the front of the classroom, his eyes scanning the room of tired students. I want each of you to write about your future. Tell me where you see yourself in 10 years. No limits, no holding back. Malik stared at the blank page in front of him. 10 years? He had never thought that far ahead. He had never let himself. The other kids wrote quickly, their pencils scratching against the paper. Dreams of being doctors, artists, basketball players filled the room. Malik watched them, wondering how they could be so sure, so confident that they would make it. He thought about Daniel, about the way the officer had believed in him when no one else had. About how, for the first time, Malik had someone in his life who saw him, not as a statistic, not as a troubled kid, but as something more. Slowly, he picked up his pencil. In 10 years, I want to be a lawyer. The words came before he could stop them. Malik had never met a lawyer before. He had only seen them in courtrooms, dressed in suits, fighting for people who needed help. He thought about how many times he had needed someone to fight for him. For his mother, for Aisha. He didn't want to be powerless ever again. His fingers tightened around the pencil. He wasn't sure how, or when, or if it was even possible. But for the first time, Malik had a dream, and he was going to fight for it. The letter arrived on a cold February morning. Lisa found it in the mail and hesitated before handing it to Malik. "It's from him," she said, her voice careful, controlled. Malik's stomach clenched. He hadn't heard from his father in months. Not since that first letter. Part of him had convinced himself that he wouldn't reach out again. That maybe he had given up on trying to change. He took the envelope with steady hands and carried it to his room. Shutting the door behind him, sitting on the edge of his bed, he unfolded the letter. "Malik, it's been a long time. I don't even know if you'll read this. I don't deserve for you to. Prison is different than I thought it would be. There's a lot of time to think. And I've been thinking about you. About Aisha. About your mother. I've done a lot of terrible things. Hurt people I should have protected. And every day, I live with the weight of that. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you. But I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm in a program now, anger management. Substance abuse counseling. They say it's not too late to change. I don't know if that's true. But I want it to be. You once looked at me like I was the strongest man in the world. I lost that. I lost you. But I hope, one day, you might look at me again. And see someone worth knowing. Take care of your mother. Take care of Aisha. And take care of yourself. Dad." Malik stared at the paper for a long time. His emotions tangled inside him. Anger, doubt, pain, and something else he couldn't quite name. He wanted to believe that his father was changing. But he didn't know if he could. Carefully, he folded the letter and placed it inside his drawer, next to the first one. Then he locked it away. Malik didn't talk about the letter. Not to his mom, not to Aisha, not even to Daniel, but something about it stayed with him, lingering in the back of his mind like an unfinished conversation. One afternoon, after school, he found himself standing outside the community center Daniel had once told him about. It was a place for kids like him. Kids who had lived through things they shouldn't have. Kids who needed somewhere to belong. Malik hesitated before stepping inside. The room was brighter than he expected, filled with kids his age. Laughter. The sound of sneakers squeaking against the gym floor. It didn't feel like a shelter. It felt like something else. Something safe. "Malik?" He turned to see Ms. Johnson, a woman in her early 40s with warm eyes and a kind smile. She had been running the center for years, helping kids get back on their feet. Daniel had told her about him. She didn't ask why he was there. She just nodded toward a table in the corner. "We're starting a tutoring program for younger kids. Could use some help if you're interested." Malik hesitated. "I don't know if I'm good at that." Ms. Johnson smiled. "You don't have to be good at it. You just have to show up." So he did. At first, it felt strange. He had never thought of himself as someone who could teach, someone who could help others. But as the weeks passed, something changed. He saw kids who reminded him of Aisha, kids who reminded him of himself. And for the first time, he realized that maybe he could be more than just a survivor. Maybe he could be someone who made a difference. Months passed. Spring turned into summer. The apartment felt lighter, filled with more laughter, less fear. Lisa was smiling more. Aisha was growing fast. And Malik, he was changing too. One afternoon, Daniel picked him up for another basketball game. They played for a while, the sun beating down on them, sweat dripping from their brows. After the game, they sat on the sidelines, drinking from water bottles. "You've been different lately," Daniel said. Malik raised an eyebrow. "Good different or bad different?" Daniel chuckled. "Good different." Malik stared at the court, watching as younger kids chased a basketball across the pavement. "I don't feel scared anymore," he admitted. Daniel glanced at him. Not even a little? Malik thought about it. Maybe a little, but not the way I used to. Daniel nodded. That's growth, kid. Malik looked at him. You think so? I know so. Malik let out a slow breath, letting the warmth of the sun sink into his skin. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. The classroom was buzzing with nervous energy as students prepared their final presentations. Mr. Reynolds had given them weeks to work on their "Who I Want to Be" project. And now it was time to share their dreams with the class. Malik sat near the back, gripping the edges of his notebook. He had spent hours on his speech, rewriting it again and again. But now, as his turn crept closer, doubt started creeping in. What if they laughed at him? What if they didn't understand? His hands felt clammy as he listened to the other students. Some wanted to be athletes. Others wanted to be doctors or artists. Their dreams felt easy, effortless. And then, it was his turn. Malik Johnson, Mr. Reynolds called, looking at him with an encouraging nod. Malik forced himself to stand. His legs felt shaky as he walked to the front of the room, gripping his paper so tightly his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath. When I was younger, he began, his voice steadier than he expected. I didn't think about the future. I didn't let myself. The room was silent now. Every eye was on him. Where I grew up, we didn't talk about dreams. We talked about survival, about making it through the day. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. He swallowed, then continued. But then, something changed. Someone told me that I could choose who I wanted to be. That my past didn't have to define me. He glanced at Mr. Reynolds, then at Daniel, who had come to watch. And I realized that I want to be a lawyer. I want to stand up for people who don't have a voice. For kids like me, kids who have been hurt and don't know how to fight back. I want to make a difference. He let out a breath, his hands loosening their grip on the paper. For a long time, I thought I had to be afraid of the future. But now, I think I'm ready for it. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, the first clap came, then another, and another. Malik blinked as the applause filled the room. And for the first time in his life, he felt seen. The letter arrived on a rainy afternoon. Malik found it sitting on the kitchen table when he got home from school. Lisa standing nearby, watching him carefully. It's from him again, she said softly. Malik hesitated. He had locked the first two letters away, unread for weeks. He wasn't sure he could handle another. But something inside him made him pick it up. He carried it to his room, closing the door behind him before sitting on the bed. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. Malik, it's been a year, a whole year since I saw you last. I'm still here, still in prison, still trying to be better. I won't pretend it's been easy. There are days I want to give up. But when I think about you and Aisha, I remember why I can't. They let us take classes here. I started studying law. Funny, right? A man like me, trying to learn about justice. But I wanted to understand. I wanted to know why I became the man I did, and how I can make sure I never become him again. I don't know if you believe me. I don't blame you if you don't. But I want you to know, I haven't stopped trying. And I won't stop. Not ever. No matter what happens. I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. Dad. Malik read the letter 3 times before he finally set it down. For so long, he had wanted to hate his father. He had wanted to forget. But the truth was, he didn't just hate him. He missed him, too. And that was the hardest part of all. The community center had become a second home for Malik. At first, he had only gone to help with tutoring. But over time, he had started doing more, helping with events, mentoring younger kids, listening when they needed someone to talk to. And in helping them, he was helping himself. One afternoon, as he packed up his things, Ms. Johnson approached him with a small smile. You've come a long way, Malik, she said. He shrugged. I just did what I had to do. She studied him for a moment. No, you did more than that. You chose to be better. That's not something everyone does. Malik looked down, her words sinking in. He had spent so long running from his past, trying to outrun the fear, the pain, the anger. But now, he realized something. He wasn't running anymore. He was facing it, and he was winning. The night before Malik's high school graduation, he sat at his desk, staring at the 2 letters in his drawer. For years, he had kept them locked away. But now, he reached for them. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded the first letter, the one his father had sent from prison. He read every word. Then, he opened the second letter. By the time he finished, his chest was tight, his eyes burning. There were no easy answers, no way to erase the past. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Taking a deep breath, he reached for a blank piece of paper and picked up a pen. And for the first time, he wrote back. Years later, Malik stood in a courtroom, not as a defendant, not as a witness, but as a lawyer. He had made it. His mother sat in the front row, Aisha beside her, beaming with pride. And in the back of the room, an older man sat quietly, watching. Malik met his father's eyes. Neither of them spoke, but for the first time in years, they understood. Because this was not the story of a boy who was broken. This was the story of a boy who had survived. And in the end, he had won.